India is under real geopolitical pressure from multiple directions right now, confronting a level of strategic strain that would overwhelm most nations placed in a similar position. First, there is the US, which wants India to become a junior partner, surrender its strategic autonomy, and denounce Russian oil and defense systems. Europe is pressuring India over its Russia ties. Pakistan wants to bleed India with 1,000 cuts, and China, meanwhile, poses the most serious challenge, pressuring India both militarily along the border and geopolitically across the wider Indo-Pacific. But there is one more factor: Russia falling completely into the hands of China, which would be detrimental for India in the long run. Sure, India has made several blunders too in its own backyard. But who hasn't made such errors? Ask the US, they have made countless mistakes as well. Europe learned this the hard way through its heavy dependence on Russian oil. China's mistakes, however, are often overlooked by Western analysts. China's first major mistake was pouring money into Pakistan, expecting it to become a stable route to the Indian Ocean, a counter to India, and a showcase for Belt and Road. Instead, China inherited political instability, civil-military friction, attacks on its engineers, and rising loan scrutiny, reducing Belt and Road Initiative to scale without sustainability. In its own region, Beijing chose pressure over quiet economic influence, turning India from a manageable rival into a hardened opponent and damaging its soft power through wolf warrior diplomacy, trade punishment, and public intimidation. The final mistake came with the Russia-Ukraine war, which pushed Europe to move from seeing China as a partner to treating it as a rival and potential adversary. Before we talk about why India won't allow Russia to fall completely into the hands of China, we must understand the geopolitics of the West: China, Russia, and India. Without that understanding, this complex situation becomes difficult to grasp. If we simplify strategic cultures, the US-led West is alliance-based, China follows an asymmetric, hierarchical model, Russia operates through spheres of influence and power dependency, and India is unique among these major powers. For India, there are no permanent enemies and no permanent allies, only permanent interests. Its model is issue-based partnerships without loss of autonomy. Yet notice that these completely different models still come together in forums like the SCO and BRICS. This happens out of convenience, not convergence, driven by overlapping interests against Western pressure rather than shared strategic logic. First, we must examine the Russia-China angle and why their relationship is a big illusion that most can see through. China and Russia declared a no-limits strategic partnership in February 2022, just 20 days before the Ukraine invasion, implying that friendship between the two states had no limits and no forbidden areas of cooperation. This was clearly a signal to the West. However, Chinese strategic culture does not favor this equation. Historically, China saw itself as the center, with relationships structured as senior-junior rather than peer-to-peer. Even today, Beijing avoids true alliances and prefers asymmetric partnerships. China would never view Russia as equal, and there is a dark history behind this. China has never forgotten how the USSR treated it as a second-tier communist state. Moscow dictated terms on technology, ideology, and military doctrine. A key example is how India received MiG-21 technology due to the Sino-Soviet split. Khrushchev openly talked down to Mao. From Beijing's perspective, it will never again be the junior partner in a socialist bloc. That lesson flipped after 1991. Now China ensures Russia can never reverse roles. An equal Russia would imply shared decision-making. For China, Russia is useful, but not trustworthy. It is useful because Russia is militarily strong, resource-rich, and diplomatically disruptive to the West. But it is also emotionally volatile, drowning in sanctions due to repeated wars, historically expansionist, and prone to sudden strategic shifts. China never gives full trust to powers with independent military-industrial complexes and global diplomatic reach. Thus, Russia is best kept strong enough to fight the West, but weak enough to be controlled by China. For years, Russia's worldview has divided the globe into great powers and buffer zones. Stability comes from dominance over the near abroad. Allies are tools, not equals. Even CSTO members and strategic partners are expected to follow Moscow. In return, they receive protection in exchange for obedience and can be punished if they disobey, as seen in Georgia and Ukraine. Russia cannot form Western-style alliances due to its weak economy and its perception of compromise as weakness, compounded by deep historical paranoia. History offers many examples: Stalin and Mao, the Warsaw Pact, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, and post-Soviet Russia and Ukraine. When China stopped being a junior partner, Russia feared the loss of ideological leadership, leading to the cutting of nuclear cooperation and cancellation of joint projects. In the Russian elite mindset, Ukraine was a brother nation, equal in theory, but Ukraine's independent NATO and EU choices were seen as defection, resulting in Crimea in 2014 and the 2022 invasion. This is where things become very interesting once India enters Russia's worldview. India is an anomaly in Russian foreign policy. Russia has studied India's psyche and concluded it does not need to fear India in the same way. Because India has never claimed leadership over Russia's sphere, presents no ideological competition, and maintains clear strategic autonomy without encroachment. Russia accepts India's disagreements and multipolar partnership because India lies outside Russia's identity trauma zone. Russia also understands India's strategic autonomy, shaped by colonial trauma, non-aligned movement DNA, fear of entrapment by great powers, and diverse internal priorities. India is not Western style, as Western alliances require automatic responses, while India insists on decision sovereignty. India has proven this repeatedly. When the US asked India to join the war on terror in Afghanistan, India categorically refused. When asked for US bases, India sent Washington empty-handed. The US wanted to turn the Quad into a security alliance, but India prevented that. Even when the US threatened India over purchasing Russian defense systems and sanctioned Turkey for doing so, India went ahead with the S-400 purchase. This convinced Russia that India is a partner that makes independent decisions. This trust is not theoretical. It is visible in Russian behavior. If Moscow viewed India as a strategic threat, it would never have allowed India to enter Armenia with defense deals, especially with modern, indigenous Indian systems like Pinaka, Akash air defense systems, and the Spotty radar. Armenia lies inside Russia's traditional security space, where Moscow has historically resisted outside military influence. While Armenia did acquire limited Chinese rocket systems in the 1990s during Russia's post-Soviet weakness and has explored selective French defense purchases in recent years, these were either transactional or politically symbolic, not capability shaping. What is unprecedented is Russia's tolerance of India entering Armenia decades later with battlefield-relevant systems that integrate directly into Armenia's defense architecture. China, despite its proximity and economic weight, did not expand into this space in the same way. This tells us something critical. Russia does not see India as an encroaching power, but as a stabilizing one. India is also not China-style. China demands hierarchy, deference, and silence on disputes, while India rejects China-led structures that compromise sovereignty. India has proven it is not a buffer state to any power and has the potential to become a genuine alternative. Russia treats India differently, accepting near equality through co-development, technology sharing, and long-term trust. However, Russia does not seek shared global leadership or joint ideological framing with India, because India would never accept that in the first place. Russia behaves this way with no other major partner, not Iran, not CSTO states, and not even China. India refused to become a client state of the US, Europe, or Russia. Russia does not respect India because India resists everyone. Russia respects India because India resists without humiliating others. India insisted on local production, source codes, joint research and development, and export rights. Normally, Russia resists such demands, but India framed it not as, give us tech or else, but as, we build together or we buy less. That is peer-level negotiation, rare in Russian experience, and BrahMos proved it. No country except India has received joint ownership, shared IP, co-branding, and export clearance. Russia does not offer this to China for obvious reasons. Russia sees India as a civilizational state, not a satellite, completely different from the US, which often views India as another Pakistan. In Russian elite thinking, India is not a temporary regime, not a Western proxy, and not an expansionist threat. Russia categorizes India differently, and that distinction matters psychologically.